I welcome you, as the living Christ has welcomed me. You know, we like to think of ourselves as a pretty eclectic church, don't we? A sort of big tent, a melting pot of lots of different theologies and church cultures that come together in one place. And if we think that's us, you should just have imagined Paul back in his day. I mean, trying to hold together this Jewish and Gentile churches that are coming together, trying to figure out, this was at a time before any of the councils had met, before they had come out with any of the official statements of what theology was right and wrong and how people were supposed to think about their faith and their theology. And so he's writing this book to the church in Rome, the center of the entire universe at that time, trying to give sort of his magnus opum, that's pretty funny. His magnus opum, his sort of theological A to Z of everything you're supposed to believe, and he's trying to pull all of these vast threads together. He stops in the middle of it all, and he says this: welcome one another, therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you, for the glory of God. Welcome one another, therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you. Please pray with me. God, I pray that you would come and speak a fresh new word that each of us needs to hear today. Be with the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts, that they might be found acceptable through Christ, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, the results are in, and it is official. A few years ago, the Presbyterian Church at its national office down in Louisville conducted a study. They painstakingly collected all the data from all over the entire country. They set the parameters, they tested it for statistical validity, and what they found is that, statistically speaking, we Presbyterians invite someone to come to church with us on a statistical average of once every 23.6 years. Can I talk to you frankly for a few moments? It's not just the Presbyterian Church. All over the country, our church, the church, is in a rapid decline. A generation ago, the pollsters found that about 30 to 40% of Americans were saying that they were regular church attenders. Now, that statistic is down somewhere below 17 or 16%. 2.7 million people are leaving church every year and not going somewhere else. 4,000 churches are closing their doors every single year. They say that it's something like 97% of all the churches in the country are in decline. The Catholic Church is suffering the worst losses, but the mainline church is very close, right behind them. Even the evangelical megachurches and independent churches that were always the largest and fastest growing have been struggling recently. Churches like Saddleback and churches like Rob Bell's church in Michigan and Morris Hills in Seattle. Even Willow Creek, that all the other churches were patterning their growth styles after, did a very highly publicized study just a few years ago, trying to ask why it was that they were losing membership while they had stopped growing and were starting to decline. Even in our mainline churches, in our Presbyterian churches, some of our largest flagship churches are struggling. We have churches like Hollywood Pres, which was the first megachurch in the entire nation, is really much smaller than it used to be. Menlo Park has started to decline. Bel Air, this lighthouse up on the hill that's one of the most active and quickly growing churches in our entire nation, in the last few years since the recession, has lost about a quarter of its membership and its budget. They say for the mainline churches that it's particularly the mid-sized churches that struggle the most, the ones that are more than 200 members but less than 2,000 members. We're right in the middle of that statistic. And they say of those churches, it's particularly the ones that are losing the most are the ones that are over 40 years old. We will be celebrating our 80th birthday this coming year. It has been a tough time for churches. Church attendance has been a real struggle as well. Another statistic came out that said that only 25% of those who go to church go more than once or twice a month now. Regular church attendance used to be more like 3 or 4 times a month. Now more and more people are seeing it as sort of once or twice a month, which will cut your church attendance completely in half. It used to be that Sunday mornings were respected as a time when people didn't set up other things so that people could go to church. But as you and I know, there are more and more opportunities on Sunday mornings. And actually, more than that, there's more and more people who are expecting us to be other places on Sunday mornings. As a pastor, I see this in spades. I always thought my kids will never do anything other than be at church on Sunday morning. But suddenly, if they want to have a trophy for having played in their soccer league all through the fall, they have to be at the trophy ceremony on Sunday morning. I think the iconic statement that sort of wraps it all up was when my wife got an invitation from one of Ryan's classmates to come and be at a birthday party at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. And she called up the mom and said, "Why are you doing it right while many of us have church?" And the mom said, oh, darling, it's just the world is so busy right now. Sunday mornings is the only time everyone's free anymore. We as Presbyterians have seen this kind of catbird seed of power and influence slowly and quickly going away. It used to always be that the Presbyterian church was the most prominent, the most influential church. We were the ones who were always being invited to the White House, asked to do the benedictions and invocations at all of the high schools and the universities. We were the chaplains of the U.S. Senate and of NASA and the fire departments and the police departments. And all of that has been quickly going away. Do you want to know some good news? The spiritual hunger never goes away. It is a part of who we are. It is an integral part of what we were created to be. Every single one of us has these questions of life and death, of meaning and purpose. Every single one of us feels a spiritual longing in our heart to connect to our Creator, and that is not ever going to change. It hasn't changed since the day we were created. It certainly hasn't changed since 300 AD, when St. Augustine said that every human being is born with a God-sized hole in their heart that can only be fulfilled by an encounter with the divine. You want to know another piece of good news? Is that those people who are still looking for church, many of them are looking for churches like ours. Churches that are a little bit more open and welcoming. Churches that are a little bit more involved in serving their community and their city and their world. They want churches that are more authentic and real. They don't want churches that are judgmental and arrogant. It's one of the reasons why so few people are interested in church anymore. They look at the church and they are scared that it's going to be full of obnoxious, pushy, arrogant people who are going to be trying to ram their religious agenda down their throats. And I can't really blame them. I know I was in Boston not too long ago, and I had this street preacher come right up into my face. He was getting all up into my personal space. His face was all red, and he had this tone in his voice that seemed like he wanted to pick a fight with me. And he said, "Are you saved?" I said, yes, I am a Christian, if that's what you mean. I am saved. He said, "Well, do you go to church?" I said, "Yes, I go to church. I go to church like every week." He said, "What church do you go to?" I said, "It's a Presbyterian church." He said, "Oh, that's no good." He said, "If you were to die tonight, do you know where you would go?" I said, "That's a very disturbing thought. But yeah, I guess I do know where I would go." He said, "Do you manifest the Holy Spirit?" I said, "Come on, we're Presbyterian. We don't manifest anything." But he just kept going on and on. It was like he was attacking me. And finally I said, look, I am a Christian, but I'm starting to think I don't want to be because of you. Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. You know, over the last 4 weeks, we've been talking about how to change the world. Bill Hybels at Willow Creek is very famous for saying that he believes with all of his heart that the local church is the hope of the world. And you know what? I believe that with all of my heart too. That the local church is the one place that has the potential for changing lives, for changing societies, for changing cultures than any other institution or organization out there. Our 5-year plan that we're sort of halfway in the middle of has asked us to have an intentional conversation about church growth, about how we can become that hope for the world, how we can start to not just slowly decline. I'm so proud of our church that we've actually held together pretty well considering everything that's going on in all of the churches around us, but even we are slowly declining. And this 5-year plan has asked us to have a serious conversation about what would it look like, what would it take for us to start inviting people again into these pews, welcoming them in a way that we have been welcomed by Christ, involving them in the life and the ministry of this church, and then closing the back door so people don't just float away. We have plenty of people who move away and have to leave for various reasons, but we don't want people to just float away. How do we do that? How do we become intentional about that? If the Church of Jesus Christ truly is the hope of the world, how do we welcome one another as Jesus Christ himself has welcomed us? And the first thing that we have to do is we have to ask ourselves the first and most basic question: do we have something that's worth sharing? Does Jesus Christ really make all of the difference in someone's life? Does Jesus Christ, is that the thing that everybody needs more than anything else? And it's a real question. Sometimes it's a tough question to answer because we have all seen, I know you have seen, I have seen people who are moral, wonderful, upright, giving, generous, compassionate people who don't have any faith whatsoever, right? And so it's a real question. Does everybody need Jesus Christ in their lives? And I think the best way to begin answering that question is just to ask ourselves, what difference has Jesus Christ made in my life? Does Jesus make a difference in how I live my life and the things that I go through when I go through tough times? Does it make a difference that I'm connected to God, that I have that relationship? Does Jesus Christ make a difference in the things that I choose to the decisions I make and the priorities that I set and the way that I live my life and the way that I understand that I'm connected to my loved ones and to my community and my world? Does Jesus Christ make much of a difference in my life? And when you've answered that question, if the answer is yes, then wouldn't it be arrogant of us to assume that Jesus can't make at least that much of a difference in the lives of the people around us? You know, I think sometimes we forget that the spiritual life is the natural life. The vast majority of human beings across this planet have always known, always believed that there was something more than themselves, something that they were connected to, that there was a divine, that there was a creator, that they were meant to be in relationship with. Teaching someone to embrace their spiritual life isn't like trying to teach an elephant how to fly. It's like trying to teach an eagle how to fly. People need to know that God loves them, that they are supremely valued, and that their life has significance. People need to know that they're not alone, that they belong to a community of grace when they go through the tough trials of this world, that they are not expected to cope with family tensions and bitter disappointments and self-doubt and economic reversal and the temptations that come to all of us and hurt ourselves and those around us. We were not meant to go through those things alone. People need to know that there's a peace that goes so much deeper than just the absence of conflict. That there is a hope that holds us up and sustains us when we're going through times of terrible loss and grief. That there is a kind of belonging that blesses us and ties us together and pulls us out of this preoccupation that we have with ourselves. We need to learn how to accept and extend forgiveness, learn how to really love ourselves and one another and our city and our world. We need to learn how to serve and how to be served. We need to learn that life is not about having something to live on, but having something to live for. That it's not about taking something for ourselves, but giving of ourselves. Do people really need God? 1,000 times yes. Yes. So first, we have to be clear inside of ourselves that Jesus Christ really is a gift that everybody could use. And then we need to be comfortable about talking about this gift and inviting people to church. I think it's so interesting that we are willing to push anything, a new diet, a new movie, a new book, whatever it is that we think is great, a droid, an iPhone, the big iPhone, the little iPhone, whatever it is. A bunch of years ago when TiVo came out, I remember they had people they called TiVo evangelists because they were just kind of talking about the benefits of recording your TV shows. When somebody asks us, so what are you doing tonight? Do we say, oh, I have a commitment? Or do we say, oh, I'm going to my Bible study? There are easy, unobtrusive ways to let people know where you find your hope. Imagine how much it would change the face of our church if when people said, so what are you doing this weekend? We said, oh, I've got dinner with good friends on Friday, a couple soccer games on Saturday, and then on Sunday we all go to church. I've never asked you before, would you ever be interested in coming to church with us? I guarantee you, even people who have no interest whatsoever, they'll be flattered that you asked. They did a survey one time and asked only atheists. They found that 75% of atheists would gladly go to church with someone if they were just invited. Interesting, isn't it? And even if they're not interested, they'll be glad that you asked. We need to be comfortable about speaking about our faith, about inviting people around us to come to church, but then probably most importantly of all is the way that we welcome them when they get here. What does it mean to welcome one another the way that Jesus Christ welcomed us, the way that Jesus welcomed Zacchaeus and said, I need to come to your house today, or Nicodemus who came to him in the middle of the night, or the centurion, or the lepers, or the children, or the blind, or the lame, or the Samaritan at the well, or the woman who was caught in the act of adultery? What does it mean to welcome one another in the same way that we ourselves were welcomed by Jesus Christ? A few weeks ago, we were wanting to have this conversation about church growth that the 5-year annual plan has asked us to have. How do we invite people better? How do we welcome them when they get here better? How do we involve them in ministries and then close the back door so we don't lose them? And so we invited Rich Litke, the founder of the Master Greeter program, who lives in Washington, to fly down and share his program and his experience with us and our leadership team. And there were a number of things that he said that really struck us. The first one is he said, statistics show that the average church is going to have about 150% of their weekly worship attendance come as visitors every year to their church. So if you use that formula, we have about 500 visitors who come through the doors of this church every year. He said the typical church is lucky if they're able to get 1 or 2 out of 10 to come back and get involved in the church. And he said something very interesting. He said, everyone who comes and visits your church, they go out and they are on statistic average going to talk to 5 to 10 people about the experience that they had at your church, whether it was good or bad. So, if you are able to welcome people in such a way, and first he said that, when people are made to feel like they matter, when they come to church and the church makes them feel like they matter to God and so they matter to you, those people will come back. When they're made to feel like they're important, they will come back. When somebody shows that they've remembered their name, they will come back. And the best thing you could ever do for church growth is when those people come through your doors, that 2 or 4 of them come back instead of 1 or 2. Do that and you'll double your church growth immediately. You'll also lessen the amount of people who are out there speaking bad things about your church. He taught us this wonderful program, which we hope to make available to all of you before too long, about how to greet people, how to remember their names, how to make them feel important, make them feel like they matter to God and they matter to us. It was a wonderful, wonderful morning with Rich Litke. But the other thing he said that the people who walk through your doors as visitors every morning, they are the real heroes of Sunday morning. You might have pretty special service, some wonderful music, some great teaching, whatever it is. You might have all of that, but the real heroes are those visitors, because everyone who comes through your doors as a visitor, they had 1,000 reasons not to come that day. They had 1,000 other things they could have been doing. They had 1,000 fears and apprehensions and skepticism about what they were going to meet when they came through your doors. They had 1,000 worries about whether they were going to find parking or find the child care or make their way into the sanctuary, if they were going to sit in someone else's seat or not know when to stand up or sit down or not know what to say. They had 1,000 reasons not to come, and every time someone walks through those doors, it is a bona fide miracle, because they have overcome 1,000 reasons not to come. And the way that you receive them, the way that you welcome them, will make all of the difference in their lives. Never underestimate the power of an invitation to transform people's lives. At one point, we asked him why he was doing all of this, and he said, my story really isn't all that different from many of you. He said, my kids grew up with us in church. It was such a strong, wonderful foundation for them, but all of them. And they went off to college and then went beyond. None of them have come back. He said, I have been praying for my son every day for 20 years. Every day for 20 years I've been praying that he would pluck up the courage, that he would overcome those 1,000 reasons to stay away, and that one Sunday morning he would find himself, all the stars would align and everything would come together, and he'd have the courage, and he'd get up and he'd get dressed and he'd go down and drive down to the church. He'd find the parking space. He'd negotiate whatever he needed to get in there, that he'd get into that sanctuary. And he said, if that happens, if that miracle happens, that church had better be as welcoming as my church is. He said that church better be one of the churches that I've trained to be welcoming, or they've done their own training, or they've figured this out, that this is the most important thing they could ever do. Because nobody is coming through your doors by accident. There is someone who has been praying for years that they would come. And whether they have a good experience, so much of it happens before they ever sit their self down into the pew for the service. Over the next number of weeks and months, we're going to be talking about in session, we're going to be talking about here, we're going to be talking about around this church, what it means to be a welcoming church. That is one of the most core principles of who we are. It's the first big word in our mission statement, that we are a welcoming church. What does that mean, to welcome one another as Christ has welcomed us? I want you to join us as we think about it and we talk about it and we explore what it means to be a welcoming church. Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed me. Amen.